So hi everyone and welcome to today's session on Teams and data loss prevention. Before I introduce myself, before we start, we did just want to say a couple of quick things. So please join the M365 Chicago event today in supporting Chicago Public Schools through the Children First Fund. You can donate through the link there and the QR code. You can also provide feedback about the conference as well to help us improve. The link is there as well as the QR code. I will pop the slide up at the end as well. And of course, a huge thank you to our sponsors. Without our sponsors, obviously, we wouldn't be able to run events like these. Finally, which is quite fun for this conference, is there is raffles and giveaways, which is really, really exciting. There's gift cards, there's Xbox One available, so make sure you submit your entry in the link there. Okay, let's get started after that little bit of housekeeping. So your speaker for today, so my name is Kat Greenan. I'm a Microsoft Solutions Specialist based in the UK. And I work for a Microsoft Gold partner. I specialise in Microsoft Teams and now Viva. So more on the collaboration side of Microsoft 365 as well as compliance. I'm a frequent conference speaker and I do have a blog called collabwithkat.com. So if you did want to find out more about Microsoft Teams tips and tricks, please feel free to follow. I'm a podcast host as well for Cloud Conversations. And finally, on the right hand side there, you'll see some of my contact details, my email address, my Twitter handle. I'm on LinkedIn as well. So if you did want to connect and follow, please feel free to. I do post updates on Teams compliance, Viva, as well as kind of the tips and tricks videos and blogs. So please feel free to connect and follow. It's always good to expand our networks. Okay, so Teams and data loss prevention. How do we make sure that as an organization, we're sharing and storing data in a compliant way? So we're going to look at some compliance challenges. We're going to set the scene first a little bit with some context on why we might need to think about compliance solutions when we're working in technology. We're going to look at what is DLP, so what actually is it, what does it do, and why is it important? Finally, we will be running in or doing a live demonstration. So I'm going to show you DLP from an end user perspective, as well as how to kind of go in and create a policy in the admin center. So we're going to look at a couple of things in the compliance center, as well as the end user impact of that as well. So you see both sides of it. We're going to talk about what's new. There's a couple of new things that have been introduced recently with DLP. It's always worth being aware of those. And finally, licensing requirements. Unfortunately, there is a caveat with certain bits of DLP. Some you get in, typical E3 licensing. Some you need add-ons and upgrades and so on. But I will define what that is, and I have a slide at the end to just go through that with you, so you're aware of what's involved. Okay, let's make a start. So, as more employees are shifting into remote work, it's really, really important now more than ever that we are really prioritizing the protection of our business critical and sensitive data. And that's across applications, endpoints, cloud services. Your employees are going to be accessing and creating and sharing and storing lots and lots of data in new ways than they did before. So what we need to really make sure is that we're being compliant and we're protecting our data. And because I guess there is a massive growth of corporate data, which has been really exacerbated by the increase of remote work, and there's more kind of complex regulations, I guess, that really need us to govern our data and manage that risk, which is all really essential to digital transformation. With Microsoft Teams, if we think about how organizations or how we ourselves would use data, it would be documents and emails to communicate, nice and easy. Today, we're handling things like instant messages, chats, video files, images, and a lot more. And Microsoft have said that Teams, as a collaboration platform, is hitting over 250 million. I think that's actually gone up. 250 million monthly active users. So that means that because there are more users sharing information on Microsoft Teams, the ability to share information, with people outside of the organization, there is a bit of a greater chance of data leakage. And one of the things that we will talk about today is how data leakage, I guess, is not necessarily always malicious, and how we can kind of educate our users on sharing information properly. But we've got lots of people using Teams. There's a lot more space for error. One of the other challenges that we face is not just the amount of data that we have. It's not just the fact that we're now looking at different types of data. The actual act of protecting data is quite challenging. So if we're thinking about how we discover and manage our data, how we deal with data that's sensitive and protecting it, it's not necessarily all storage of data is going to be sensitive, but we really need to make sure that we're protecting the data that we want to, the data that is sensitive to us. It's a lot easier said than done, and just finding it is a bit of a challenge. Knowing how to identify our sensitive data, where it's located, and how it's being shared is actually such a big problem that 80% of our data is dark. So there's no wonder then that 88% of organizations have no confidence that they can detect and prevent the loss of their sensitive data. And if you add to that our current climate of remote work and data being shared through non-corporate devices, so our own personal iPads and laptops, the problem just compounds. But there is a solution to those challenges, and that solution is information protection and governance, Microsoft Information Protection. Now, Microsoft Information Protection is a variety or a selection of solutions that come together to discover and protect our data in Office 365. We're going to focus on one of those solutions today, which is DLP, but it's important to kind of know the life cycle. And most organizations, when I work on customer workshops, if we're talking about compliance, and there's different elements to it, there's finding your data, there's sensitivity labeling, there's data loss prevention, there's retention, there's all of these tools. Where do you start? And this is quite a nice slide to explain how you should start when it comes to protecting your data. So after your information, your data is created or it's originated, you typically want to have a system in place to scan and detect that sensitive data as it moves across your devices, apps, and services. Now, in most environments, only a small percentage of the entire, loads of data, a huge amount of data that you have actually contains sensitive information. So the key is to be able to identify and detect that data that contains the information that's important, that you care about. So we don't necessarily want to apply, DLP and sensitivity labeling and all these tools to everything. That's just a bit of overkill there, but we do want to apply that to things that we care about. Now, one of the first, there's a couple of different ways to detect that data. There are really great MIP scanners, so Microsoft Information Protection scanners, that can be used to scan for sensitive data across all of your environments. So what I mean by that is it will scan any kind of on-premise file repositories that you have, as well as any data in Office 365. That's a great place to start to actually see, okay, what is it that we actually have to protect? There's no point creating a policy to protect financial data if you don't really store or use financial data in your environment. So that's the first port of call. I am going to show you a way to have a little look at some of the sensitive data in the cloud. I'll show that in my demonstration in a little bit. Now, once you've found the data, once you've found it, you want to classify and label it. So we're in Protect Your Data now. And classifying and labeling it is using a solution called Azure Information Protection and sensitivity labeling. So what that means is that if the data is considered sensitive, it will be labeled as confidential, and we'll put some actions around that label to either, prevent certain things. I want to prevent this person from being able to share this type of information with, a certain group of people externally. We want to prevent, things like printing. We want to, really protect it so people can't even share their screens and show the information on a Teams call. So there's actions that we can put against those labels. But one of the key things to note is that not all sensitive data will be the same, will have the same level of severity. So for example, you might have data that contains employee ID numbers, and so you might want to label that as confidential. But if something has, a social security number, for example, you might want to label that as highly confidential. So you'll have different levels of the labels. Once the data has been stamped with that sensitivity label, what we need to do is apply the appropriate protection policy, and that is data loss prevention. That's what we're going to focus on today, and that's where it fits into this kind of life cycle of compliance. So we find our data, we stamp it with a label, and now we need to make sure that we're preventing data loss. And that is several protective actions, encryption, restricting access, and so on. So whether the data stays in one place or it moves around, we need to make sure that we're able to protect it, wherever it is moved to or wherever it lives. I'm going to go into that in a bit more detail, so we will come back to this because this is our focus for today. Finally, in here, govern your data. So depending on the sensitive data that you have and the policy that you've created, there might be data that's subject to retention and deletion policies, expiration. So that's really important. If you are storing personal information, you can only store it for a certain amount of time. You can use retention policies to govern that data. So that's something else to be aware of as well. But that is the overall life cycle of information protection and governance when it comes to Microsoft 365 compliance. So let's go back then. Let's focus on our data loss prevention. What is it? What is data loss prevention for those who maybe aren't aware? So what is DLP? So our guests will focus on Microsoft's data loss prevention solution. So Microsoft's DLP solution provides a broad range of capabilities that really address the modern workplace challenges that I've kind of gone through at the beginning of this presentation. And one of the key areas, or one of the key things that it's trying to do, is prevent data leakage, as the name would suggest. So if we have a piece of sensitive information, for example, a credit card number. So to my organization, credit card numbers are really sensitive, and I don't want that information to be stored in the wrong place, to be shared in the wrong place. I don't want that piece of data to be going outside of the organization. So what I could do, I could actually apply a data loss prevention policy to say, I don't want my employees to share, 5 or more instances of a credit card number through their email, for example. So it's that idea of preventing the users from being able to share lots and lots of sensitive information, but at the same time, educating them on how to do it better. So don't share a credit card number through direct email, add an encryption on it, or apply, put it in a sensitivity label in a document, for example. So it's not just, putting that prevention in place, it is also educating users as well. Now, if you are a Microsoft 365 E5 customer, you have such great tools with DLP, because you can apply a DLP policy to non-Microsoft Cloud apps. So things like Adobe and PDFs and Salesforce and, Dropbox, if you don't want certain things being stored in Dropbox, which is, it really helps you put the loop around security when it comes to the apps that your users are using. You can apply it to endpoints, so your devices. So if you want to prevent people from printing things from their devices, or you are putting things on USBs, we can actually create DLP policies to support that. And finally, if you're an M365 E5 customer, the thing that we're focusing on today is Teams. So you can apply a DLP policy in Teams. So what that means is that we can say, I don't want credit card numbers to be shared through a Teams channel message or a chat message. So we can block the message from being shared. We can put a policy tip in place to educate our users on why we've blocked this and what they should do now. And we can totally customize the policy. So we can decide what data we block, where we block it, what teams, what users, what we do with that information, what alerts are actually sent, and so on. So there's quite a lot that we can customize to suit our business requirements. And that's what we're going to look at today is Teams DLP and how we can actually apply that policy and what that looks like. Big caveat again, you need to be an E5 customer to use Teams DLP, or if you buy a Microsoft 365 compliance add-on, that also gives you Teams DLP. More on that towards the end on the fun licensing topic. So I guess why would you want to do that? Why would you want to put a DLP policy to stop people from sharing sensitive information in channel messages or chat messages or any tool in Office 365? Well, the biggest thing is that when we have a case of data leakage, most of the time, it's not malicious. It is accidental. It's a user accidentally sharing a credit card number in a Teams channel. They didn't realize that there was a guest who has been added, who's an external user. They haven't realized that, and so they've now sent a credit card number, and it's got to people outside of the organization. That's usually accidental. DLP is definitely a tool that is designed for that type of accidental data leakage. If somebody did really want to get that information outside of the organization, with DLP, it'll pick up a 16-digit number as a credit card number. If somebody split that number up, and sent it, it would go through. So it's not necessarily there for malicious intent. There are other tools, insider risk tools in Microsoft 365 that you should look at instead of that. But that's DLP. It's really for those non-malicious accidental data leakage scenarios. One other thing we need to think about, or why you would want to add DLP, is we don't just want to shut off users being able to share information that they need to. So we need to make sure it's protecting data in a productive way. It's not impacting the user's productivity at all. So we might want to exclude certain groups. For example, we might exclude the finance team so they can share credit card numbers. We can have high and low confidence ratings. So, it gets rid of false positives in case somebody sends a 16-digit number and it's not a credit card number. And we can add things like keywords surrounding it, to make a high confidence and so on. So there's tools, and I'll show you those in a second, tools that we can use to actually make this useful without hindering productivity. And it's also wanting having a tool to provide guidance for end users to make the right decisions. So instead of just saying big red cross, nope, can't share that, don't do it, you need to educate them on how to not make that mistake again. So it's just going to improve your security and compliance within the organization, because users will now be told how to share important information or confidential information. So that's why we might want to add a DLP policy or Microsoft DLP policy. Let's take a look at it. Enough talking. Let me show you some demonstrations of DLP. Now, the first thing I want to show you is actually, when I mentioned the first thing you need to do is detect which data you have. I would highly recommend the MIP scanner for that. You can also, this isn't necessarily a tool for heavy kind of discovery into your data. It's more for you can kind of see what there is in your environment. And that tool is called the Content Explorer. So what you can see on my screen is the Compliance Admin Center. I'm a global admin. On the left-hand side, I've clicked on Data Classification. I'm now going to hit Content Explorer. And what this is going to do is it's going to show me sensitive information that I have in my Office 365 tenant and where that sensitive data is. So you can see here, it's showing me sensitive information types, which I'm going to come on to in a second. But these are types of information that might be deemed sensitive. Credit card number, debit card number, there's tax numbers in here, full names, email addresses, passport numbers, and so on. So these are Microsoft provided templates of sensitive data. You can see in my organization, we actually have 57 instances of credit card numbers. And if I click on credit card numbers, I can actually see where in my environment those numbers are stored. So I can see there's 11 in SharePoint, 5 been sent an email, and 41 in OneDrive. So in this case, I might open up OneDrive, and just as an FYI, if you did want to go in today, if you're a global admin, you go into your environment, you look at Content Explorer, and you cannot access this bit. So you can see this, but when you try to dig in deeper, it blocks you. That's because you need the compliance viewer and the compliance manager permissions. So you need to, even if you're a global admin, you need to add an additional compliance permission. So it's either the viewer or the manager or the administrator, compliance administrator. It's one of those. You need that to be able to view this information. But you can see here, I've got OneDrive accounts. Patty has 2 files, so I can open that even deeper. So I can see Patty has 2 files that have credit card information, 10 or more, 2 or more. So let's have a look at this one. I can dig in deeper and see it was a purchasing data Excel spreadsheet. There was a credit card, debit card, there was ID numbers, and so on. So I can see the confidence level. I can see what actually was in that document in terms of sensitive data. So in this case, Patty is part of the finance team. This is a purchasing document. It's appropriate for her to, have that type of information. But I guess one of the points that I'm trying to make with this is if we wanted to put a DLP policy around something like passport numbers, and we actually didn't have any passport numbers being shared or used in our environment, that's kind of a pointless policy. So this just gives you that, okay, let's see, give me an idea of what type of data I have. MIP Scanner is definitely the tool to kind of pull all of that data out, and then you can have a look at recommendations of things that we can do to protect it. This is just to see what there is. And when I'm here, sensitive information types, so these are provided by Microsoft, but you can create your own. So in sensitive information types here, this is the basis of all the compliance policies you create. So I can create a DLP policy that just prevents the sharing of medical terms or full names or Australian passport numbers. You can see there's a huge list in here, or you could go in and create your own sensitive information type. You can create keywords. So if there was a project name that was sensitive, you could create a sensitive information type for that name. Regex works in here as well. So if you wanted employee IDs as a sensitive information type, you can. So one thing I would say is look at your sensitive information types and create your own if there's not one in here that you'd want to use already. Okay, let's look at, so we've seen that it's credit card numbers that we might need to protect. I've got my sensitive information type. There's actually already a template in here for credit card numbers, so I'm just going to use that. I don't need to create a new one. I'm going to now create a DLP policy, and we're going to protect credit card numbers from being shared in Teams and in files in SharePoint. So that's files in Teams as well. So I'm going to click on data loss prevention under solutions on the left-hand side. In here, I didn't like that. In here, I'm going to go to policies, and you'll see a list of the policies that I've created previously. Let's go in and create a new one. So you'll see any policy that you create in here. I'm going to create a new one. And the first thing it's going to ask you is which sensitive information type do you want to protect? So if you had your own, you would choose custom. But in this case, we're going to choose financial data. And let's see if it's not going to like me typing in that way. So that's fine. So let's choose financial data. And let's choose United Kingdom. UK financial data. So it will give you a breakdown as well of what information that is. So that's a credit card number, a debit card, and SWIFT code. That's the information I want to protect. I'm going to give my policy a name. Now, I'm not very creative with my naming conventions, but you should put a proper naming convention in place so other admins know exactly what the policy is protecting. Give a description, and I'm going to hit next. So now we can choose the locations to apply this policy. Where do we want to, prevent this information from being shared? Anything below here is an E5 license requirement. If you're on E3, you have this. If you're on E5, you've got this and all of these. So you can see I can apply DLP to devices, on-premise, Power BI dashboards, Defender for cloud apps, so that's third-party apps. as well as Teams chat and channel messages. So E5 is definitely a good investment when it comes to DLP. Because we don't have a large amount of time, let's just keep it to OneDrive accounts. So that means all the files and chats. SharePoint sites, because that means all of the files and channel messages, and we'll keep Exchange online as well for our conversations. What I could also do is choose to include or exclude certain groups. So if Teams, I might want to exclude the finance team. If I exclude the finance team, everybody else will have this policy applied except that team or that group. If you choose a group to apply the policy to, so say we just want to apply this to the sales team, then everybody else apart from the sales team will be able to share the information. So that's how it kind of works when you include or exclude groups. I'm going to hit next. And what you can do, there are some default settings that it provides. So let me show you what these are. We are going to go in and we're going to customize them a little bit more. So I'll show you the full capability. But in here, I could review where this information is being shared. So detect when the content is shared with people outside of my organization or with people inside of my organization. So if you really want to keep it locked down, like stopping P2P sharing and things like that, this is your option. But I could choose to share, protect with people outside of my organization. I then have some kind of default settings. So do you want a policy tip to appear to your end users? I would say always keep this on. It is always useful to tell your users why this information has been blocked and, what to do. You can customize that as well. You can customize what is sent to them. So the policy tip will appear. I'll show you what that looks like. And an email will be sent to them to tell them what's happened. So detect when a specific amount of information is being shared at one time. So if, there's at least 10 or more instances of credit card numbers being shared, that's when I want you to detect it. And when that happens, I want you to send an incident report in an email. So I want you to email these 5 people with this information to see exactly what's happened. Again, you can set alerts to global admins as soon as someone sends 10. So it's real-time alerts that you can apply here as well. And then we can choose an action. We're going to restrict access, or we're going to encrypt the content with Microsoft 365. And in here, we have some other options where we can decide to block everybody. So that means just the owners of that information. So for example, if it's a SharePoint file, I could decide to block everyone. So only the owner of that document would be able to see that information, or just, if we're wanting to keep it from people outside of the organization. And if you did want to allow people to override the policy, again, this can get rid of things like false positives as well. Allow users to say, nope, you're wrong, this isn't a credit card number, let me override it. But you can require a business justification. So why are you overriding it? And that business justification is kept. So you can actually go back and review when a user has actually, disabled a policy, why they did it, and you can set up alerts on that as well. So if there was you think it's malicious, if they've done that 10 times, you might want to then flag that up to say, look into this user, why are they, trying to share this information? So that is the default policies, but I want to just go back really quickly because I did want to show you when we're creating or customizing rules. So in here, we've got when there is a low volume of content detected or a high volume of content detected, and we can create and customize these rules. So when there's a low volume, so, there's only 1 or 2 credit card numbers in this message or whatever it may be, you can have different rules to versus there's 10. As soon as there's 10, do this and block it and stop sharing and alert everyone. If there's a low volume, just keep a track of it and, block it from outside people outside the organization. So you can have different rules for the different levels of confidence, the level of volume of sensitive data. So in here, we can see I have my conditions. The conditions are your sensitive data. So because I chose a default template, a sensitive information type template, it's provided these for me. If you choose custom, you can go in and just add your sensitive information type. You can see the instance count. So if there's 10 or more, then I want you to do these actions, stop sharing it, and so on. When the content is shared outside of the organization, you can also change that to inside. We know about this, but there are some exceptions that you can make. So you can say, okay, I don't want you to apply this rule if the content contains, a certain file type, or if it contains the word, with the finance team or whatever it may be. So you can go in and make it a little bit more granular by creating exceptions and creating exceptions of groups as well. The notifications. So just to do a bit of a deeper dive on the notifications, because it's the education piece. We've got the block piece. This is now the education piece. So we need to make sure the users are informed and educated, give them a policy tip. And then who do you want to email when this happens? When something has been blocked, do you want to notify the user or notify, the owner of the site or the OneDrive account, which in this case would be the user? The person who sent or shared the content, again, that would be the user. You can add people to that as well if you want to add their manager or some of the compliance team or some of the administrators. Customizing the email and customizing the policy tip is useful as well, because I'll show you what the default looks like. The default is, let me show you now actually. So if we just, I'll go back to this in a second, but the default policy tip is kind of, I've opened up a document in SharePoint here. It's got a credit card number, and the policy tip is the items protected by your organization. I can click on more options, and a little panel will just say, it's protected. The policy is this. You can't have credit card numbers. In this policy, it doesn't tell you what to do. It tells you to report an issue to your admin, but in here, you could just edit that to say, please send it through an encrypted email document. Don't send it through Teams, whatever it is that you want to put in here. So you could customize that tip. That's why I just, focus on this. Again, you can allow a user to override and you can get an alert. So we're digging in deeper now. You can get an alert when there's a certain amount of instances. So if somebody tries to override a policy with more than 15 items in it, or this large, or in the last so many minutes, I want you to email me, email the site admin, email me, email the rest of the global administrators. So there's quite a lot that we can do, and also with content contains as well. Then something that I'll touch on later is now the ability to add file types to this. So if your content contains a file type which is an image, or in this scenario, it's quite useful to do like video files, so Teams recordings. So if there's any video files with this data in it, I want you to protect it and stop it from being shared. So even if somebody has that information stored in a Teams recording, you do have the ability to, protect that as well as files and messages, which I thought was quite cool. So that's coming, being rolled out now, I believe. So test it out first. Always, always, always test out your DLP policy. Do not turn it on straight away, because you need to see the impact of it. You need to see if it's going to, disrupt your users, if you've, not put the volume correctly, and as soon as somebody shares something, it's going to get blocked. And that's something to just be aware of. Always test it out first before you turn it on. Because this is a demo tenant and it's actually not, there's no live users in here, I'm going to turn it on straight away, but always test it out first. Review your information, and I'm going to submit that and turn on that policy. So now what has happened is when I create that policy, by the way, it might take a little bit of time for the policy to work, so just be aware of that after you've submitted it and turned it on. But what will happen, because we've applied this policy to SharePoint, OneDrive, Teams, if I try to share credit card information, it won't let me, and it will educate me. Now, in this scenario, in this demo tenant, I've actually created a policy previously. So Blue Peter, if anyone knows that, here's what I did before. So I've already created a policy, and what I did was I changed the high volume and low volume to 1. So I said, if somebody shares 1 instance of a credit card number, block it straight away. It's not recommended, because that's very, it impacts users' productivity. But for the purposes of showing you how the technology works, I've said, as soon as somebody sends 1 instance, block it. So what I'm going to do now is show you what that looks like for the end user. So I'm going to go into my Microsoft Teams environment. I'm in a project team. Let's go into a new channel. And I'm going to start a new conversation. And in this conversation, I'm going to type in a credit card number. Now, DLP is going to pick up a 16-digit number as a credit card number. So what I'm going to do is just do 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, credit card info here. And I'm going to send that into the team. And as soon as I send that into the team, it's going to block it from being shared. If we just give that a quick second. Usually that's the one thing you got to love about live demonstrations is that it's not going to do it straight away, although it did do it straight away for this one. So when I tested it yesterday at 10:30 in the morning. So what will happen is it will block it. It's not got on for me. But this is what the user will see. It will block it from being shared. Here's the credit card number that you asked for. It's picked up at 16-digit and it said, nope, it's flagged. Now for the user, they can click on the what can I do? Again, this is the tip that is shared. So here's what you can do. You can, report it to your admin. Again, I would replace that with what they can actually do to share or how they can actually share it, just because you're going to get lots of messages as an admin. It's going to cost you more time. So put in a good policy tip in there. I could report it. That'll send a message to the admin for the end user. And this is Microsoft Teams. In Teams files as well. So you can see in here, we've got a sales and marketing team. I've got a general channel. I've got files in here. And with some of these files, they actually have credit card numbers in them as well. And because I applied a policy to SharePoint, as well as Teams chat and channel messages, it's applied a DLP policy to a file within Teams. So in here, I can see there's a little icon. And if I hover over it, it says it contains sensitive information. So when I click on the file and open it up within Microsoft Teams, it's going to see, oh, I've got a credit card number in there and a passport number. And so the item's protected. Here's the policy tip. So that tip shows up in Teams as well as the SharePoint site behind Teams as well. And this is instant. As soon as a user adds this sensitive information in, this is automatic. You don't have to manually apply anything after you've created the policy. This will automatically do it for the user. Again, in SharePoint, you can see I've got a couple of files in here that have DLP policies applied to them. So the item is sensitive. Here's another sensitive item. You can view the policy tip. And what this means is because I've stopped the ability for this information to be shared with anybody outside of this particular team for my policy, when I highlight this file and try to share it, you'll see that everything is grayed out. The only option I have is to share with people who already have access to this file. So people in that team, in the SharePoint site, or people that I've shared this file with before. I can't share it with anyone outside the organization. I can't even share it with other people in the organization, only people with existing access. And as an organization, these are on. So if I just show you another file that doesn't have a DLP policy applied to it, so let's just try and share this one, you'll see that I do have the options to share. So that's what it looks like from an end user perspective. And what I did there was I created the policy to say block sharing with everyone. Don't let anybody see it. It's really, really, confidential. It's really, really, needs to be locked down. And so that will come up in SharePoint as well as Teams messages. So when you're applying a policy to just to Teams, it's a good idea to apply it to SharePoint files as well. So you got that covered. So a couple of things that I wanted to cover before we finish as well. That was looking at it from an end user perspective and setting up as an admin. It's easy enough, I guess, to go in and just turn on the policy, but you need to think about what your requirements are. What is your sensitive information? What do you want to do with it? Where do you want to protect it? That needs to be decided before you start going in and applying these policies. You need to figure out as a business, what is it that we actually want to achieve? Okay, so a couple of new things. I mentioned the restrict access to file type in DLP. So you can put conditions around the files. So you can do it based on a file extension or a file type. Again, the Teams recording example is really useful for this. So this is brand new to DLP. And you can now also monitor sensitive files that are added or stored to archives. And you can restrict access to archives that contain sensitive files as well. So it's now kind of expanding the reach of DLP. Endpoint DLP, so this is kind of where I mentioned with all your kind of devices. So the endpoint DLP is relatively newish. It's definitely something to be aware of. This is for your E5. So if you're on E5, this is something that you'll, or Microsoft 365 E5, this is something that you'll get. So you can audit and manage when a user uploads an item to a restricted service domain if they try to copy information into an app. It can detect when a user tries to copy information to a Bluetooth device or a USB and lots more. So if you really want to put that kind of loop around your security and compliance, endpoint DLP is definitely one to look at and be aware of. And then finally, in what's new, the Chrome browser DLP extension. So it's called Microsoft DLP and Insider Risk Management Chrome extension. So you can use Chrome as an approved browser in DLP for working with sensitive data, and you can create custom policies to make sure that the sensitive data in Chrome is handled properly and protected from disclosure. So you can see here, I've got a PDF that I'm using in Chrome. I can view that information in Chrome because it's approved, so that's fine. As soon as I try to print it, that's going to prevent that for me with the DLP policy. So some funky new stuff, and there are new things being added all the time to the DLP capabilities. Lastly, so the final thing I wanted to touch on is licensing, and I mentioned it before. Teams DLP is available in either Office 365 E5 or Microsoft 365 E5 or Microsoft 365 E5 Compliance, which is an add-on. And this is an example of what you get in the E5 Compliance. So you get the endpoint DLP, there's advanced e-discovery, insider risk management, some really kind of key tools in here. I would say if you just want to use the Teams DLP, the add-ons are going to be a lot cheaper than upgrading all your users to E5. And anybody who has that policy applied to them will need that license. So that's just something I would make you aware of. But that's where Teams DLP is available. And that was everything I wanted to cover in today's session. So hopefully now you can see what DLP is, what challenges it solves, what the policy looks like, and some new stuff and the licensing in there as well. So hopefully the session has been useful. So thank you so much for listening. I will stop talking now, see if there are any questions. And again, please, give your feedback. There's a QR code and link. I'll keep that up for a couple of minutes if you did want to fill out a survey and give us some feedback. So thank you so much. I'll hold on for any questions, but feel free to jump off if you need to go to your next session. So thank you very much. Thank you. I can see the claps. I appreciate that. So Karen, I could just see your hand up there. Let's see if that works. I've turned on the mic if you did want to unmute and ask a question, or you can use the chat, whichever way you're comfortable.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. There we go.
Awesome. When you were talking about the licensing and you were talking about E5, is all of the same licensing equivalent in the GCC accounts as well?
What do you mean GCC? Sorry.
Like if you have a GCC 5 account or a GCC 3 account, the government accounts in the government cloud?
Sorry, yes, it's the same applies. Yep, the same licensing rules. It's an E5 Gov license that you need.
Wonderful.
Yeah, still the E5. Sorry.
That's okay. Thank you.
Before.
Thank you.
No worries. Perfect. And I can see any other hand? Ian, I can see your hand. Let me just. Oh, I've unmuted you there. There we go. You should be able to speak now.
Hi, yeah, just a similar one around the licensing. In terms of F licenses for sort of frontline workers and what the situation is for them.
Different rules, of course. Of course there is. So there are F5 licenses that have recently been announced, which gives you DLP. I believe it's similar to the E3. So if you've got Office 365 F1, you get Exchange DLP. If you have Office 365 F3, you get the SharePoint and OneDrive, but you still need to upgrade to get the Teams DLP. But you still get DLP, it's just either with Exchange for F1. Most customers that I speak to do license their frontline workers with F1, so they just get the Exchange in there.
Okay, thanks. Yep.
No worries. I love these licensing questions. It's always the fun one licensing. Wonderful. Let me, David, I can see you've got your hand up there. I've just unmuted you.
Thank you. So I have a few SMB customers who the management teams want their a few employees to be able to email credit cards to vendors that might be overseas, or they don't have faxes anymore, etc. And so obviously that's not a good thing over clear email. So we wanted to make it a requirement that when it went out, it was encrypted, but found that employees either didn't know about it or forgot about it. And so I tried to make that kind of automatic. So if they did send it, it would alert that it was going out, but it would automatically encrypt it. And I couldn't figure out how to do it within the DLP section of Microsoft 365, and I ended up having to, configure a transport rule. So I'm just wondering if that has changed at all, or if you have any advice on best practices around this scenario.
Yeah, I think the easiest thing, I'm going to share a link with you on how to do it, because one of the things that you could do is have that kind of education piece again to say you need to make sure you encrypt. Here's how you encrypt the file, so you can have the users do it manually. There is a way to restrict access and make the file encrypted when the data contains sensitive information. And I'll send a link on the how to, which might be easier. So you can, and I'll send it.
Okay.
Let me.
This would be in an email, not necessarily within a file.
Yeah, within a okay, within the email itself. Let me look into that for you and see the best way. Let me see what the best way is to. Do you have access to the?
It's both. It's both. It could be both. It could be
both.
In like
both.
a PDF,
yeah.
or it might just be in a plain email where they include financial payment. When we're dealing with vendors overseas and.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely fine. Are you happy to share your email in the chat, and I'll get back to you on that?
Yeah,
follow
no
up.
problem.
Yeah, cool.
Thank you very much.
No problem. Wonderful. Are there any other questions? Please feel free to use the chat, pop your hand up. No, if there are no more questions, you can jump off. I'll hold on for another minute or so. Obviously, David will wait for that email to pop through. But yeah, feel free to jump off. I'll hold on if there's any other questions. Thanks a lot, David. I've just seen that come through now. Yeah. And I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference. So I'll hold on, but feel free to jump off. Okay, looks like no more questions. I will end the session there. Thanks very much. And I hope you have a good rest of the conference. Thank you. Bye.